So, we've been very blessed. We've had the same curse. And so everybody I work with was very close to Frank.
Every one of these people write my check. Every one of them do. So I try to spend time with them, and if we don't rise to the occasion all the time, then I feel like I've failed.
What we wanted to do is create an atmosphere here that into the store feel like you're on a pick. Not so much an antique shop.
Mike Wolfe's sentencing stunned viewers across America when the American Pickers star was led away in handcuffs. Everyone thought his arrest was related to some dispute over antiques or perhaps a business disagreement with the History Channel. According to breaking news reports, Wolfe was arrested because the death of his former co-host Frank Fritz wasn't from natural causes as initially reported. Instead, investigators now classify it as premeditated murder. Medical reports indicate Fritz was found with lethal levels of medication in his system. He was deliberately overdosed, and prosecutors grabbed Wolfe for the murder because it was calculated, not accidental. Drugging your former business partner, who trusted you completely, is beyond comprehension. Some would even call it evil. Although many fans believed the tension between the two pickers was just for television ratings, Wolfe was already behind bars and facing serious charges for what prosecutors called a revenge killing motivated by jealousy and greed. However, reports surfaced on social media showing that Wolfe initially had his charges temporarily downgraded as investigators gathered more evidence. Another post revealed that Wolfe was initially arrested after a crew member from American Pickers placed him at Fritz's home when he died. The Iowa State Police investigated thoroughly and found damning evidence, including Wolfe's fingerprints on medication bottles and suspicious text messages to Fritz, leading them to push for first-degree murder charges. The investigation into Frank Fritz's death began when the medical examiner noticed inconsistencies in his toxicology report. The official cause of death had been announced as complications from his stroke, but the autopsy revealed dangerous levels of prescription medications in his system, levels far beyond what would be prescribed for his condition. This immediately raised red flags, especially since Fritz had been carefully following his medication regimen during recovery. The Iowa State Police quietly opened an investigation focusing on who had access to Fritz in his final hours. What they discovered shocked even veteran detectives. Security footage from Fritz's neighborhood showed Wolfe's vehicle arriving at the residence late at night, approximately 3 hours before emergency services were called. Later that night, it was Wolfe who called 911, claiming he had stopped by to check on his old friend and found him unresponsive. Upon arrival, paramedics found Fritz unresponsive with no pulse. Attempts to resuscitate him failed, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Initial reports suggested it was related to his previous stroke, but the toxicology results told a different story. What made investigators particularly suspicious was Wolfe's behavior immediately following Fritz's death. Instead of the period of mourning one might expect, he moved quickly to assert control over Fritz's collection and intellectual property. Within 48 hours, he had contacted Fritz's attorneys about acquiring rights to his name and image for future American Pickers merchandise. According to testimony from production staff, he also immediately moved to access Fritz's storage locations containing valuable antiques that had never been featured on the show. Several crew members reported that Wolfe seemed unusually focused and not particularly grief-stricken when discussing business matters so soon after Fritz's passing. When detectives searched Wolfe's residence and office, they discovered a hidden safe containing several unlabeled prescription bottles, later identified as containing the same medications found in Fritz's system. Most damning of all was a journal found in Wolfe's travel bag, where he had written extensively about his growing resentment toward Fritz. Some entries dated back years, with increasingly hostile language. In one entry from just weeks before Fritz's death, he wrote, "F thinks he can come back and take half the spotlight again. He forgets that without me there would be no show. He's become a liability. The network is showing me there's only one way to save what I've built." During the 6-week trial, Wolfe appeared surprisingly calm, sitting quietly next to his attorneys as the prosecution laid out how he had methodically planned Fritz's death. The jury heard evidence that he had been researching untraceable poisons and ways to make a murder look like natural causes. His internet search history revealed queries such as can stroke medication interactions be detected after death, and how to make someone's death look like stroke complications. The prosecution argued that Wolfe had taken advantage of Fritz's previous health issues, seeing them as the perfect cover for murder. Former American Pickers crew members testified about witnessing disturbing changes in the dynamics between Wolfe and Fritz in the years leading up to Fritz's departure from the show and subsequent death. One production assistant testified that she had overheard heated arguments about the future direction of the program, with Wolfe demanding complete creative control was a major point of tension. Wolfe told Frank that he had lost the right to equal billing after his health problems. An assistant testified about this, and several witnesses described Wolfe as becoming increasingly controlling, often speaking disparagingly about Fritz to network executives and isolating him from longtime friends in the antique community. Perhaps the most emotional testimony came from Danielle Colby, who reluctantly took the stand for the prosecution. Fighting back tears, she described confronting Wolfe about his behavior toward Fritz. "I noticed Mike had become obsessed with being the sole face of American Pickers," she testified. "When I asked him about reconciling with Frank, he became defensive and angry, telling me to stop interfering in things that don't concern you." Colby also described finding disturbing notes in Wolfe's office about Fritz's medication schedule. When she questioned Wolfe, he claimed he was just concerned about Frank's health. The defense tried to paint a picture of a misunderstood friendship, suggesting that Wolfe had genuinely tried to reconcile with Fritz before his death. They brought in network executives who testified about Wolfe's public statements supporting Fritz's recovery. However, this theory was severely undermined by testimony from Fritz's personal physician, who stated that while Fritz had been concerned about his health, he had been optimistic about recovery and was making plans to launch his own antique business. The doctor also confirmed that he had never prescribed the medications found in Fritz's system in such high doses. During cross-examination, Wolfe's carefully maintained composure began to crack. When asked directly if he had given Fritz the medications, he snapped at the prosecutor, "You have no idea what it's like to build something from nothing and watch someone else take credit, to smile for the cameras while everyone thinks he's just as important to the show's success." His outburst caused his defense team to call for a recess, but the damage was done. Jurors later reported that this moment was pivotal in their deliberations, as it revealed the resentment Wolfe still harbored years after Fritz's departure from the show. The financial motive became clear when forensic accountants testified about suspicious changes to Wolfe's business structure. In the months before Fritz's death, Wolfe had been quietly restructuring his companies to absorb Fritz's intellectual property in case of his incapacitation or death. He had also taken out a business insurance policy on Fritz, making his company the beneficiary of a $5 million payout. Additionally, prosecutors revealed that Wolfe had established several shell companies that Fritz had been unaware of, and had been transferring valuable antiques into these entities, totaling over $2 million in assets. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. When the judge announced a life sentence without the possibility of parole, everything went completely off the rails. Wolfe, who had maintained a poised demeanor throughout the trial, suddenly jumped up, screaming, "You don't understand. He was going to ruin everything. He was going to destroy my legacy." He lunged across the defense table, sending legal pads and water glasses flying. The bailiffs rushed toward him, but he was already charging toward Fritz's family, swinging wildly before they could restrain him. People in the courtroom began screaming and pushing toward the exits as Wolfe broke free again. This time, he grabbed an antique walking stick that had been entered as evidence and swung it like a weapon, striking one of the bailiffs in the shoulder. "I built American Pickers. It was my life's work," he shrieked as 3 more officers tackled him to the ground. The judge was evacuated from the courtroom as Wolfe continued fighting violently, kicking and screaming about betrayal as officers tried to subdue him. Fritz's sister, who was present at the sentencing, had to be escorted out by security as Wolfe tried to lunge toward her. "I deserved everything. It was my show," he screamed as they finally managed to handcuff him. The most shocking moment came when Wolfe locked eyes with Danielle Colby, who was seated in the gallery, and shouted, "Tell them the truth. Tell them what Frank was really like." Colby turned away, visibly distressed, while other crew members broke down in tears. The American Pickers family has been torn apart by the trial, with some supporting Wolfe while others testified for the prosecution. Court documents revealed that Wolfe had been systematically turning crew members against Fritz in the years before his death, creating deep divisions within the production team that may never heal. As security personnel struggled to control Wolfe, he continued his tirade, revealing even more shocking details. He was going to start his own show, he screamed. He told me I was obsolete, that the network wanted him back. Courtroom reporters described the scene as surreal, with at least 3 people fainting in the chaos. Several people were injured, including Wolfe's own defense attorney who was struck by a flying water pitcher. Even as they dragged him from the courtroom, he continued shouting about betrayal and his legacy, claiming that Fritz had planned to destroy him. Legal experts later commented that his violent outburst effectively destroyed any chance of a successful appeal, as it contradicted his defense team's argument that he was a misunderstood businessman incapable of violence. In the days following his courtroom meltdown, former friends and colleagues of Wolfe came forward with stories that cast new light on his character. Former American Pickers producer Thomas Reynolds described instances where Wolfe would fly into rages behind the scenes when things didn't go his way. He maintained this perfect folksy image on camera, Reynolds said. But off camera he could be terrifying, especially to junior staff. When the cameras stopped rolling, his whole demeanor would change. Others described him as becoming increasingly paranoid in recent years, convinced that Fritz was conspiring to return to television with a competing show. The case has sent shockwaves through the reality television community. American Pickers, which reached millions of viewers worldwide, now faces an uncertain future. The History Channel has pulled all episodes featuring Wolfe and issued a statement expressing shock and sympathy for Fritz's family. Several major sponsors have pulled their support, and the show's future remains in doubt. Fritz's family has filed for control of his antique collection and intellectual property, promising to honor his legacy while pursuing legal action against the network for enabling Wolfe's increasingly erratic behavior. Mental health experts who have analyzed the case suggest that Wolfe may have been suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, exacerbated by his years in the spotlight. Dr. Robert Keller, a forensic psychologist who followed the trial, explained, while this doesn't excuse his actions, it helps explain the disconnect between his public persona and private behavior. People with narcissistic traits can appear charming and composed while harboring intense resentment and plotting revenge. The departure of Fritz from the show would have been a narcissistic injury that festered for years. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how Wolfe used his platform as a television personality to manipulate public perception. In the weeks following Fritz's death, he had gone on social media tearfully attributing his passing to complications from his stroke, using the opportunity to announce special merchandise in Fritz's memory. This was not just murder, prosecutor Sarah Donovan said in her closing arguments. This was a calculated deception of millions of trusting viewers who mourned alongside a man who had killed his former partner and was using their grief to enrich himself. Investigators found that over $1 million had been raised in the weeks following Fritz's death, with much of it diverted to accounts only Wolfe could access. As Mike Wolfe begins his life sentence, former viewers and supporters are left to reconcile the public image of a passionate antique collector with the reality of a man capable of murder and courtroom violence. Many have expressed feeling betrayed not just by Wolfe's actions, but by the years of deception. We invited him into our homes every week, said longtime American Pickers viewer Robert Jenkins. We trusted his folksy charm and passion for preservation. To discover it was all a facade is devastating. Television personalities who had previously appeared with Wolfe have distanced themselves, with several issuing statements expressing shock and calling for respect for Fritz's memory. For the crew of American Pickers, the tragedy continues to unfold. Their testimony during the trial revealed a production deeply divided, with some believing in Wolfe's innocence while others were convinced of his guilt. Danielle Colby, who testified for the prosecution, has taken a leave of absence from television, citing the need for healing and reflection. In a brief statement, she asked for privacy and expressed hope that the legacy of antique preservation that initially brought us all together can somehow continue despite these tragic circumstances. Other crew members have remained largely out of the public eye as they grapple with the dual trauma of losing Fritz and seeing Wolfe convicted of his murder. The judge's final comments before Wolfe's outburst seemed particularly prophetic now, and Mr. Wolfe, he said, you presented yourself as a champion of American history and preservation while harboring thoughts of revenge and murder. You used your platform to preach the value of the past while plotting the death of the man who helped build that platform. Today, justice is served not just for Frank Fritz, but for the millions of viewers who trusted you. It was at this moment that Wolfe lunged across the table, beginning the violent outburst that would become his final public appearance before being led away to spend the rest of his life behind bars. As the doors of the prison close on Mike Wolfe, his final words to the courtroom continue to echo, a goodbye forever to all of you. The truth will come out someday. Whether these were the desperate cries of a man facing justice or the final manipulations of a skilled performer remains a matter of debate. What's certain is that the world of American pickers and reality television will never be the same. The legacy of the show, once focused on preservation and Americana, has been forever tarnished by murder, betrayal, and a courtroom outburst that revealed the darkness hiding behind one man's public face of folksy charm and passion for the past.